Hello Fanatics, I'm Dylan Phillips, and let's talk about Season 7 of the HBO show, Game of Thrones. First, we'll start off with our recap of the show, then we'll move on to our review, and we'll finish off with telling you if it's worth the watch. Created by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, based on the novels by George R.R. Martin, Game of Thrones follows the story of 9 noble families who fight for control of Westeros, while a forgotten race returns, threatening their survival. So, recap time. The main story of Season 7 revolves around Cersei's rise to power, Jon's unexpected new title, and Daenerys' trip across the Narrow Sea. So as much as I was gonna do a recap of every episode and break them down, I felt like that would be very time consuming for this very short review. So instead, I'll hit some of the highlights. The highlights of episode 1 are Arya destroying the Frey house, Sam meeting Jorah at the Citadel, and Daenerys arriving at Dragonstone. The highlights of episode 2 are Jon going down to Dragonstone to meet with the Dragon Queen, as well as Daenerys' plan being foiled as her fleet is destroyed by Euron. The highlights of episode 3 are the meeting of Daenerys and Jon as they bump heads, the reuniting of Bran and Sansa at Winterfell, and the final fight where, again, Daenerys' plan is foiled as they go to attack Casterly Rock, and eventually they realize that the Lannister army is at Highgarden and they've taken over the Tyrells, where Jaime poisons Lady Olenna, who reveals that she was the one who killed Joffrey. The highlights of episode 4 are that Arya returns to Winterfell and now 3 of the Starks are back there, and the big battle at the end where the Dothraki, Drogon, and Daenerys attack Jaime, Bronn, and the Lannister army outside of King's Landing. In this fight, Drogon is injured by Qyburn's anti-dragon weapon, but Jaime almost dies as he tries this last effort charge towards Daenerys. However, Bronn is able to save him and throw him into the river. The highlights of episode 5 are that Jaime survived the fight, but some of the other Lannister soldiers are not so lucky, as Randyll Tarly and his son Dickon are burned alive in front of the rest of the soldiers. At the Citadel, Gilly learns some crucial information, that Rhaegar's first marriage was annulled and he was secretly wed to Lyanna Stark. Tyrion suggests that they go beyond the wall to capture a White and bring it back to Cersei so that they can prove to her once and for all that the undead army is real. Davos smuggles Tyrion into King's Landing to talk to Jaime about this truce, but while he's there he also picks up a familiar face, Gendry. Meanwhile, in Winterfell, Arya follows Littlefinger around and finds a message between Sansa and Robb from much earlier, where Sansa is telling Robb to stand down and bend the knee to Cersei. And this episode ends with Jon, Gendry, and Jorah traveling to Eastwatch, where they meet up with Tormund, the Hound, and the Brotherhood, as they all decide to band together and go north of the Wall. The highlights of episode 6 include the attack of the White Bear that injures Thoros, as well as them learning that if you kill a White Walker, it destroys all the Whites that it turned. Sansa seeks counsel from Littlefinger as she starts to get a little bit skeptical about her sister's intentions, and meanwhile she decides to send Brienne to King's Landing in her place for the big meeting. Sansa also searches Arya's room where she finds her faces and is confronted by Arya, and they have this very tense moment. As the army of the dead encloses around everyone north of the Wall, Jon sends Gendry back to Eastwatch to send a raven to Daenerys. After a long cold night and Thoros' death, the army of the dead decides to finally enclose on our heroes, and just in the nick of time, Daenerys shows up with her 3 dragons. However, the Night King is somehow also an Olympian, as he's able to throw an ice spear and hit Viserion, killing him. As the group tries to escape, Jon defends them and falls into the ice, but as he reemerges again, he is surrounded by the army of the dead, and luckily for him, he's saved by Benjen. Jon returns to Eastwatch and eventually awakes on a boat, where Daenerys explains that she lost her child and now she will do anything to help him against the Night King, and for that gracious offer, he decides to bend the knee. This episode ends with the army of the dead pulling the dead Viserion out of the water, and the Night King walking over, placing his hand on his nose, and resurrecting him. The highlights of episode 7 start off with the Dragon Pit. All 3 parties come together. We have the armies of Daenerys, the armies of Jon Snow, and the armies of the Crown. They show the White to Cersei, which absolutely terrifies her, but she only agrees to help if Jon decides to pledge himself to nobody, and he just goes on his way with his armies. But he tells her that he made an oath to Daenerys, and so Cersei decides that she doesn't want to be a part of this. Tyrion decides to confront his sister about this, and says that he's absolutely devastated about what he did to their family, particularly Cersei's kids. And so he says, kill me now if you want to, but we need to defend this country and our people to survive this war. He returns to the pit, followed by Cersei, who agrees that she will fight in the Great War. Sansa becomes increasingly paranoid about her sister, and so she again seeks counsel from Littlefinger, who asks her, what would Arya want? And of course, she comes to the conclusion that Arya would want to kill Sansa to become Lady of Winterfell. Meanwhile, at this point, Theon is seeking penance from Jon, asking him for forgiveness, and Jon decides to give him as much forgiveness as he could possibly give him, and that Theon will always be both of House Greyjoy and of House Stark. At this point, Theon realizes that his sister Yara is still in danger and needs to go rescue her. And after fighting one of the crew members, he gets all of the others to rally behind him, and they go on their venture to try and free her. As Jaime prepares to ride north with his armies, Cersei tells him that they're actually not going to do that, and instead, while their enemies are fighting the dead and killing themselves, they will be reclaiming their lands so that when whoever comes back down south comes there, they will be stronger than they were before. Jaime doesn't like this plan. Cersei has told him that Euron went off to pick up a mercenary group called the Golden Company, and Jaime is just completely against this idea. However, at this point, Cersei almost has the Mountain kill him, and he has just had enough. He knows that she is past any amount of saving, and so he just decides to leave. Sansa brings Arya to the Great Hall, where she's surrounded by Stark soldiers, and they decide to have a trial. However, the trial isn't for her, it's actually for Littlefinger. At this point, Littlefinger keeps refuting everything and going against all the accusations, but Bran knows everything, and so he eventually begs and pleads for his life and gets on his knees. And then at that point, Arya just comes over and slices his neck. Sam and Gilly arrive at Winterfell, where Sam meets up with Bran, and they both discuss the information that they know, as each of them has pieces to the puzzle, but now they have the full thing, and they learn that Jon is in fact the true heir to the Iron Throne. This is where we cut to a flashback where we get to see Rhaegar Targaryen for the first time, as he's being secretly married to Lyanna Stark. After that, we jump a little bit forward where we see Lyanna and Ned as she's having her baby, and it's revealed that his real name is Aegon Targaryen. It cuts back to present day, where Jon knocks on Daenerys' door and enters, and then they have a very intimate moment. This episode ends going back to Tormund and Beric at Eastwatch, where the army of the dead comes to the wall and halts. They think that they're safe for now, but the Night King swoops in on the dead Viserion and blows down the wall with his new blue flame, causing the Eastwatch castle to be destroyed, and the army of the dead is now able to walk south. So, to be honest, I was a bit skeptical about Game of Thrones a couple seasons back, as season 4 and 5 were a little bit lackluster in comparison to the start of this series, but last season definitely amped up the intensity, and this season definitely didn't disappoint. With a slightly shorter season, there was no room for filler, and it certainly shows. The intensity never falls as the storylines inevitably come to their head. You can definitely see the bigger budget per episode, especially in the action sequences, dating back to probably last season. It gives this feel of a Hollywood war scene. The best battles of this season, by far, were the battle outside of King's Landing in episode 4 and the battle north of the Wall in episode 6. It's also interesting to see the parallels between some of the characters in this season, especially Daenerys and Cersei, going from their thirst for power all the way down to their very similar wardrobe choices. And on top of that, you have the final episode's title, which is called The Dragon and the Wolf, which could be either a reference to Daenerys and Jon, or Rhaegar and Lyanna. The cinematography in this season is absolutely magnificent and gives a very Hollywood vibe to this story. Now, a lot of people have complained that this season acted as fan service more than anything. And of course, you can speculate that considering there's no books to follow. However, I disagree. We always knew Ned was an honorable man. I mean, everyone that we ever met that mentioned him, the first thing they said was that he was honorable and had dignity. So what would push him to tarnish his reputation and say that he had a bastard? Well, lying for one of his siblings, and we knew that Jon was not Benjen's kid, so it had to be the only other Stark. What would have been ridiculous fan service is, spoiler alert, Tyrion being another secret Targaryen so that the three of them could ride the dragons, or that Beric Dondarrion is actually a constantly resurrected Rhaegar who's just lost his memories. Oh, and don't forget the fact that a lot of people think that Bran might be the Night King, and I can kind of see the similarities in how he looks and how they've changed what the Night King looks like, but at the same time, we also saw the actual birth of the Night King in a previous season, so that's a little bit... There weren't very many prominent deaths this season, as many characters could have bit the bullet, from Bronn at the Battle of King's Landing in Episode 4 to any number of characters north of the Wall in Episode 6. We even had teases that either Tyrion or Jaime could die by the hand of the Mountain in Episode 7, and yet the two biggest deaths were B-list characters in Viserion and Littlefinger. Now, Littlefinger's death was very satisfying, and Viserion's was definitely heart-wrenching, but they didn't have the same gravity as if a huge character died, and I feel like they're setting up a lot of major deaths in the final season. We already know two prominent and very likable characters that are in immediate danger. This season of Game of Thrones is full of non-stop tension, terrific action sequences, and story moments that help fill in the bigger pieces to an almost complete puzzle. While the season is shorter, this show proves why it's one of the biggest and best in the world. Honestly, that pretty much sums it up for me, so I'm going to say that this is definitely worth the watch. I really hope that next season comes out in 2018. I can't bear waiting a year and a half for it. And that's our recap and review of Season 7 of Game of Thrones. If you saw it, what did you think of the season? And is it worth the watch? Let us know in the comments below. I'm Dylan Phillips, and thanks for watching. If you like this video and you want to see more, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Check out our latest Fanatic 5 video where we discuss the top Channing Tatum roles. Don't forget to follow us on our social media. And until next time, Fanatics, keep it real.